Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, and I manage the SAGE Research Methods community. I'm pleased to be joined today by Julianne Cheek and Elise Obi, and we're going to talk about the book, The Research Design. But before we get started, if you are new to this community, we are interested in everything to do with designing, planning, conducting research, writing about it, and sharing results. And at the center of our diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think whether you are experienced or brand new, we all have something to learn. So before we get started, why don't you just briefly introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Julianne Cheek. I'm a professor at Østfold University College in Norway and one of the co-authors of the book Research Design, Why Thinking Matters, which is what we're going to talk about and aspects of today.
And my name is Elise Øby. I'm the other author of that book, and I work at Kristiania University College in Norway.
So we're going to talk about chapter 4. And here we're focusing on methodology and why that matters when we're designing and thinking about research. So to begin with, what do you mean when you say that data is a concept shaped by methodological assumptions?
Well, we wrote that because we wanted to remind people that often when they think about data, they think about collecting numbers, or they think about collecting words in interviews or images in some form of text or whatever. But what words, what numbers, and what images, one, can be considered data, and two, what form they should take, are methodological decisions. They are decisions related to the overall research design and what makes it possible for us to claim that a word or a number or an image can be considered data and that scientific data. So they also, words and numbers are literally words and numbers and only become data if they are able to help us answer our specific research question. So one of the methodological decisions we have to make when we're designing research is what type of words and numbers will I need in order to be able to answer my research question. For example, do I have an hypothesis? And if I have a hypothesis and I want to test that hypothesis, then I'm likely to want to be using, well, I am going to use some form of numbers. What numbers do I need to be able to test it? And why those numbers and not others? Or if I want to know something about the experiences and perceptions of people about some aspect, for example, of healthcare or education or whatever it might be that our focus is in our research question, what is it about the way I collect those words and the types of words that make those words trustworthy and credible in terms of being able to be considered data? The thing is that we all come to research with assumptions about what data is, or worse, we come to research without even thinking about that we have assumptions about what data is. So one of the things that we would urge readers to do is to have a look at a little activity that we put in the book. It's on page 73, and it's called a self-test. Are you taking the idea of data itself for granted? Like, is it a word that you tend to use without much thought? And we say that taking this self-test will help you answer this question. And reflexively thinking about these questions helps us expose the methodological assumptions we are bringing with us when we come to designing our research. And just running through the 6 things very briefly, because people can read them themselves, but I think this is a good warm-up to what is about to follow. So we asked readers this, and we're asking you listening to the podcast, when you read the term data in a research report, or think about the type of data you want your research to produce, what do you understand data to mean? So, that should stop a lot of people in their tracks and sort of think, well, they're asking me to think about something that I was really thinking about how to collect data rather than what data actually is and what data I might mean. And the second question is really important. whatever you think data is, what do you base that understanding on? And later in this podcast, we'll talk about your basic beliefs and what you're basing that understanding of data on. The next question challenges people to think about, is the way that you think about what data is the only way that data can be? Can it be in different types of forms? For example, there are some people who think that data can only be numerical and can be only considered data if it tests hypothesis or the research is done in certain ways. And we'll talk about that later as well. And have you been assuming that everybody thinks data is the same as what you think data is? Because there are different views about what can be considered legitimate scientific data based on researchers' basic sets of beliefs about what science is and about what data is and about what research is. Or more likely, perhaps you don't even think about this at all when we just race into picking a method, collecting words and numbers, writing a report, and forgetting that underneath that report are all these assumptions about ways that research can and cannot be done, ways that it can be considered legitimate, and ways that things can be considered to be data collected in a legitimate way in order to answer what are legitimate scientific questions. Yeah, so I think that, I don't know if you want to add anything.
It's a lot to think about, but you know, as the title of your book suggests, there's some thinking involved with this. And, you know, so often I think people just kind of jump to the, oh, well, I'll interview people or I'll do a survey. And, you know, we really need to get these kind of big questions to understand them ourselves before we move forward with sources, whether they're humans or other kinds of materials. So in your book, you talk about inquiry paradigms. So what is an inquiry paradigm and how do inquiry paradigms affect your thinking about whether the research is credible?
Well, the easiest way, and there's not an easy way really in any of this material, this chapter is a heavy chapter, to think of an inquiry paradigm is to use Guber's terminology and definition, and that is that it's the basic set of beliefs held by a researcher that they bring to the research table. Now, we all have basic sets of beliefs, and these are basic sets of beliefs such as what we were talking about with data, like what is scientific research? What is research? How can it be done? Why do we think that? What do we base that on? For example, we hear people say that sometimes research that is not hypothesis driven is not legitimate research or real research. What enables them to say that is that they have a set of basic beliefs about what scientific knowledge is and about the way that science must be done if we're talking about that you must have a hypothesis. What we point out in the book is that there are a number of basic sets of beliefs that researchers can hold and a number of inquiry paradigms that researchers can hold. And sometimes researchers may move between those inquiry paradigms depending on the research question that they're addressing. For example, one of the dominant inquiry paradigms has been something called positivism, and people will come across that. It's the name of an inquiry paradigm, all right, that basically asserts that all research is only research if it's based on what's called the scientific method. And we go through and talk about that, and it's really a method that was generated out of the natural sciences, out of physics and chemistry, where we're testing certain things and we're wanting to predict. So therefore, we do need objective data. We need data that is able to be measured, verified, tested, the hypothesis is supported or not supported, etc. So this is research that is, as I've said, associated with the typical scientific method in predominantly the natural sciences like physics, and it is hypothesis driven, able to be replicated, and is objective. However, anyone who's working in the social science area or applied research areas would know that people are anything but, able to be cut off from the values, beliefs, perceptions, etc., that they bring to the research table.
Right.
So if I want to know, for example, what it's like for older people to move from home to hospital and then have to go into a nursing home unexpectedly at the end of that, I'm likely to want to be able to ask those people about what that was like. And I need to develop research in such a way that I can do that in a legitimate way, using methods that will enable me to do that. Okay. And that is drawing on an inquiry paradigm called constructivism. Okay.
Mhm.
We often read about social constructions, etc. And constructivism is about the fact that reality isn't just about things that exist separate from us, but it's about that the human world actually co-creates the humans actually co-create the world that they are in. Okay, hence the name constructivism. We are part of constructing the reality that we find ourselves in. So what is the reality for these people moving from home to hospital to nursing home? And therefore, we need to study that in a different way than we might study the natural sciences. Where we get into problems is when somebody starts telling us that there is only one legitimate way to study something. And in the past, that's been the positivist position, okay, that the only way to study it is by hypothesis, etc. Yes, it might be very interesting to know about people's perceptions and experiences, but that's not science. That's something else. It's useful, but it's something else. So science and legitimate knowledge and research-based stuff is based on this idea of the scientific method. So what we try to demonstrate in the book is we try to give people an introduction to this quite complicated area without getting too heavy into the philosophy about ontology, which is about what reality is. You know, is there only a physical reality removed from humans, or is reality co-constructed with humans? Okay, that's ontological questions. And also epistemology, which relates to ontology, because epistemology is about knowledge, types of knowledge, what we can know and how we can know it. So if we have an ontological position that the only reality is one removed from me, the only way I can study that is to remove myself from that research and objectively go in and measure or look at aspects of that reality. So that would be my onto-epistemological position in that type of research. And that's the classic scientific method. Very important if I'm going to be measuring things like the speed of light. Of course, we would do our research that way. Or if we're going to do some form of measurement of the effect of adding a chemical or a treatment for someone on a drug, etc. Quite reasonable. However, the other ontological epistemological position from what we've been talking about is if I want to know about people's perceptions and experiences, my ontological position is one where the world is co-constructed. The world cannot exist without me in terms of that move from home to hospital to nursing home. And therefore, the knowledge that I want about that is more subjective knowledge, okay, about individuals' experiences and perceptions. I didn't say that this would be subjective research. The research would still need to be done in a legitimate way that stands up, that others can see what we've done and how we've reached our conclusions. But it will be done in a different way than by measuring a set of variables, for example, or a set of parameters that we're interested in, as it might be if we're looking at things like a drug trial or the speed of light or so forth. So we're getting into some pretty sophisticated stuff now and touching on it, and the chapter goes through this. But I think the main thing that we are trying to emphasize to people is that all of us have sets of basic beliefs about what research is and is not. We need to examine those beliefs. We need to examine what they're based on. And there is room for different inquiry paradigms. The dominant one for many years was the scientific method. But as social sciences have developed and gained entry into universities, because that's relatively recent, okay, and as we've accepted more and more qualitative aspects of research, okay, there's been room for more research informed by constructivist type thinking, all right, and that is that I need to involve participants in my research. I need to actually ask them what it's like for them related to the aspect of reality that I'm interested in. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Elisa, but I think that's the main points at this stage.
Well, it's maybe I could mention this example we developed about what you can learn about music, because that was to try to bring it down a bit, like to something that's recognizable. And we think that, or I think that your basic set of beliefs about what music is will affect which answers you're looking for, what type of answers you're looking for, what type of questions you can ask about music. So if you understand, if your basic set of beliefs is more along the lines of positivism, then you're looking for objective facts about music. And what would objective facts about music be? Then you would probably understand music as being comprised of sound waves that are produced by, whenever you put sound on something, particles in the medium through which that sound is moving, they start vibrating. This is physics. And then you could learn something about music by studying those sound waves. So you could ask questions about the wavelengths and frequencies of waves produced by different types of music, or you could ask questions about how different sound waves affect the anatomy of people's ears. And then the role of the researcher is to be an objective collector of information. But if your basic set of beliefs is more along the lines of constructivism, then all of a sudden you include in what music is also stuff about music that can't be detached from the people hearing and experiencing that music. So all of a sudden you can ask different questions about music and obtain other types of knowledge. And now you can, for example, ask about people's subjective experiences when they listen to specific types of music. And you consider that knowledge, and you can use that knowledge to develop, for example, therapeutic interventions using music. And then now the role of the researcher is not like this objective collector of facts. Now the researcher would be the interpreter of information to build knowledge of the way that perceptions of music are socially constructed. Yeah.
So clearly, it's not a matter of saying one is right or wrong. It's about matching the type of inquiry paradigm, the ways of thinking about those fundamental elements and how those correspond to the purpose of the study and what it is that you want to learn. So yeah, I think
But
that
Janet, if I may just pick up on your
Yes.
point there. It's not a matter of saying one is right or wrong in an absolute way. Okay. And that's where the problems come when people start telling us, or anybody, not us, but all of us, that there's only one way we can do research and it's this way. That's where the problem comes in. But there is a right and wrong way of doing these types of research related to research questions. So I think, like if I want to know about people's experiences and perceptions, and I'm not sure what those experiences and perceptions are, then the way to do that research is to go in with the inquiry paradigm based in constructivism and get those people's experiences and perceptions and the way that they construct the reality around that move. I'm going to have rather limited research if I go in with what I think the move's like. Later on, I might want to test how common what I found in my study is. Then the right way to do it related to that question of testing how common is that perception or experience would be to use a more post-positivist type approach, another set of basic sets of beliefs. So what we try to do in the book is move away from any polemic type positions of it has to be this way or it has to be that way, to sort of introduce people to the idea that there are a range of beliefs and positions, and what one is going to suit your research is the one that relates to the type of knowledge you're going to need in order to be able to answer your research question, the type of, if you like, data or information, and going back to the points that we made in at the opening question of this podcast.
So I think that you've already answered this question to some extent, but to just reinforce some examples of thinking through the methodology when you're designing the research, what would be the key points you want to leave our viewers with?
Yeah, I think one of the key points that we'd like to get viewers to think about is when you're thinking about a research question or a research problem that is triggering your interest for some reason, the first question should be not what method will I need to employ, but the first question should be what type of knowledge will I need in order to be able to answer that research question or research problem? Because once you know the type of knowledge, okay, then you will know the type of method that you will be able to employ in order to produce the knowledge that you will need. So the first question, and I'll put in that big word that frightens everybody often that I spent years, I must fess up, trying to pronounce, okay? The first sort of decision is an onto-epistemological one. What type of knowledge will you need in order to be able to answer the research problem or question that is driving your research? Once you know that, then there will be a cascade of decisions that are possible. But, we have students, or I've had students tell me, and this was at a conference in the US that I was at, a big conference, and a woman was sitting down and telling me, I have to use a hypothesis in my research, or I have to do mixed methods because I'm not allowed to do qualitative methods alone. And what we've got here is an example of putting the cart before the horse, because she's being told that she must use certain methods or certain approaches. What we have here is that positivist type assumption that only that type of research is legitimate, or with the mixed methods, you put the qualitative in there, but it's saved, if you like, by the more quantitative approaches. These are examples of people's basic sets of beliefs about what is legitimate and what is not. We need to put the horse back in front of the cart and sort of say, what do we need to know before we begin even thinking about what methods to use? And that's why in the book, chapter 4 comes straight after the chapter on research questions. Like, have you identified your research question and problem sufficiently that you are able to sensibly work through what type of knowledge will I need to address this? And that's why chapter 4 talks about types of knowledge and this sort of thing. And then after that, in chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, we get into methods as ways of producing certain types of knowledge. So it's all about the types of knowledge that we're going to need, what's an appropriate way to produce that knowledge, appropriate in which sense, not because your committee tells you have to do this type of research, but because your research problem or question requires that type of knowledge. And I think it's very important for people to think about why they're thinking about the answer to that question of what type of methods am I going to use, and what type of knowledge will I need. And we actually put an activity in the book, and I'm not going to go through it now, but if you've got the book, listeners, have a look at page 85, and we ask you to think through these types of questions and ask yourself some questions like, what happens to this part of my research design if I choose to do it this way and not that way? How does that impact my question, etc.? These are important questions for us when we are designing our research, and it takes away the problematic question that we usually get at some point from someone in one of our classes. Do I need a hypothesis in my research? Because what that question really means is that they're a little bit hooked on the basic belief that all research must be hypothesis driven. And what they're not asking is actually the question that goes before that, and that is, what type of knowledge will I need? And will that type of knowledge require me to have a hypothesis? So there's that question before, and it's the question before that chapter 4 is all about. And it's the question that is usually not well thought through. People rush into the methods. They think it's all about collecting data. And surprise, surprise, at the end of the process, they sometimes find that they haven't got the type of information or knowledge they need to be able to answer the question they're posing.
Okay, anything else you wanted to add about chapter 4?
No, I think, Elisa, I've said what I needed to say, I think.
No, I think your last point about students asking us, don't I need a hypothesis? And how will this produce knowledge as opposed to opinion? Those types of questions, they are underpinned by, like, people are not thinking through their basic sets of beliefs, not asking themselves the questions that we want all researchers to ask themselves. And I would recommend actually having a look at that activity on page 85 in the book, and then try to answer the questions. You ask them to yourself and answer them for yourself. And then all of these questions, is this method any good, or can I really do research without a hypothesis? You would also then know the answers to those questions.
Okay, well, thank you.